Cross Your Heart, a Julie and the Phantoms fanfiction, written by xxPrettyLittleTimeBombxx, read aloud by SkyAsimaru. If you enjoy this podfic, you can check out the original story on Archive of Our Own. If you would like to hear more of my recordings or see some of my own work, you can find me through the pen and screen name of SkyAsimaru. Cross Your Heart. Summary. Julie tells Luke about her mother's necklace and makes him wear it for luck as the boys gear up to return to the Hollywood Ghost Club. Chapter 1. A Reason to Come Back Home. Luke knows he's seconds away from poofing up to Julie's bedroom the moment she angrily turns on her heel without another word, leaving him to watch her as she stalks away from the studio in frustration. The guilt already twisting in his gut is equally as apparent on the faces of his two best friends, despite the fact that the three of them know they're doing the right thing.
How long do you think until she stops being mad at us?
Reggie asks, his voice small.
Doesn't matter, Alex answers through a grimace. She'll forgive us eventually.
He can feel both sets of eyes on him, no doubt waiting for him to chime in with something reassuring.
I'll meet you both out on the driveway, Luke says instead, still staring blankly at Julie's retreating form.
Luke, Alex warns knowingly.
5 minutes. 10,
he says, not bothering to wait for a reply before he disappears and rematerializes up near Julie's window. It's for the best. Luke knows it is. He'd known Julie would readily offer to help in any way she could, as soon as they mentioned plans to go back and break Willie free of the Hollywood Ghost Club. But for as willing as she is to do her part, it's just too dangerous, too risky. And Luke knows he'd never forgive himself if he ever let Caleb harm a single curl on her head. He also knows that he'd never be able to bring himself to go back there without first seeing to it that Julie understands none of this is about leaving her behind. No, Luke's already made that mistake once before, and he doesn't plan on making it again. Leaving her now? It's about keeping her safe. The turn of her doorknob snaps him out of his thoughts. His hands reflexively shoot up in surrender as his eyes take in the way Julie's own widen in shock when she unexpectedly comes face to face with him. He already knows what she's going to say because Luke knows her. So he beats her to the punch in an effort to put out a bit of that fire that's already beginning to simmer behind her narrowing eyes.
Boundaries, I know.
Beneath him, his feet bounce restlessly, as though trying to expel some of the nerves zipping through his veins. In the end, he lets the momentum carry him forward, one step at a time, halting short of Julie only when she crosses her arms defensively in front of herself.
Please don't be mad, Jules,
he begs.
He risked so much to help us get to the Orpheum. We have to try.
I know you do,
she sighs tiredly. I just don't understand why you won't let me come. It's not like humans aren't allowed in the Hollywood Ghost Club.
It's too dangerous. What if you get hurt?
What if you guys get hurt?
It's not the same. We're already dead, Luke reasons. What's Caleb gonna do? Kill us twice? He'd meant for it to be a joke, a bit of dark humor to lighten the mood. It doesn't land, though, and he can tell in the way Julie flinches, her eyes glossing over as her memories transport her back to the night after the Orpheum. She flinches again, no doubt recalling the memory of the three of them crumpled on the floor. A shiver works its way down his spine as Luke himself recalls the all-consuming feel of the jolts surging through his body, the way desperation had clawed at his chest, of desperately clinging to the memory of Julie's face as he'd hopelessly waited for it to end. But much like it had that night, the echo of the nightmare they'd lived through is washed away by a stronger recollection, that of Julie's small, soft form, barreling into him with a force that had damn near knocked the wind out of him, of her slim arms looping without hesitation around his neck, holding him as tight as she could against her much smaller frame, in her own form of silent defiance, as though wordlessly protesting against whatever higher power was threatening to snuff Luke out of existence, making sure that the force in question knew that if it wanted to take him so badly, it would have to pry him away from her first. Most of all, Luke remembers the warmth of her fingertips, tracing the features of his face when the pain subsided. The way those same fingers didn't hesitate to smooth away the tears seeping out from the corners of his eyes, and the way his own fingers had mirrored the same action as he'd cradled Julie's face in the palms of his hands. In the end, it's the memory of that warmth seeping into his skin and bones that gives him the courage he needs to do away with most of the distance sitting between them. Sorry, he whispers, a tentative hand coming out to rest on her arm. Bad joke. It's still new, this whole touching thing, and it's been taking a considerable amount of effort on his part not to overdo it. Most of the time, it feels like he's fighting an internal battle he's moments away from losing, fingers flexing with the urge to make up for all of the times he couldn't touch her at all, but wanted to. That doesn't mean Luke hadn't caught on pretty quick to the fact that a simple touch was usually all it took to calm Julie down whenever the fear of that night reared its ugly head. Like the feel of his skin pressed against hers was the tangible proof Julie needed to fully believe that it hadn't been a dream, that by some miracle she had managed to save them all and bring them back. Sometimes Luke wonders if it would scare Julie away to know that all he wants to do is touch her all the time. Sometimes, in moments like this, where it's impossible to miss the feel of her leaning into his touch, or the way the tension leaves her body with every gentle pass of his hand, he wonders if perhaps it wouldn't scare her at all, if maybe it would have the opposite effect, because secretly Julie wants to touch him all the time, too. Why do you really want to come, Jules? He asks.
A tired sigh seeps from her lips, his hand slipping away and falling limply to his side when she reaches up to rub at her eyes. Look, I know I can't teleport or summon instruments or anything like that, she starts. But I guess if something were to go wrong, I'd just feel better knowing I did everything I could to keep you safe. But I can't do that if I'm just sitting in my room waiting to find out if any of you... The rest of the sentence catches in her throat, her shoulders rising up toward her ears as she heaves in a shaky breath. In the end, she can't bring herself to speak whatever it was into existence. Instead, Julie presses her lips together, her fingers coming up to fiddle with the circular pendant that hangs from the longest of the 3 chains adorning her neck. Luke's eyes slide down to the pendant in question, of their own accord. It hasn't escaped his notice that her fingers tend to fly there whenever she's nervous or lost in a thought that makes her brow furrow. But he's never wanted to bring it to her attention. Despite all the soul-bearing they'd done through music, it had always seemed too personal a question to ask. "It was my mom's," Julie says, as though she'd had a front row seat to his thoughts. I never saw her without it growing up." Taking a step closer, she holds the pendant still between her thumb and pointer finger, so Luke can get a better look. There hasn't been a day since they met that he's seen Julie leave the house without wearing the necklace in question. It felt like just as much a part of her as that cute little gap between her 2 front teeth. So, of course, Luke had long since memorized its shape. Nevertheless, he takes a moment to appreciate each and every detail of the tiny raised figure of a woman set in gold. "I was terrified the first time my mom went to the hospital, but I wanted so badly to be brave. For her, for my dad, for Carlos. I've never been very good at lying, though." He chuckles at the accuracy of the omission, and Julie offers him a small smile in return before she continues. "My mom, she always knew when I was trying to pull a fast one on her, and she knew then, too. She took off her necklace, put it over my head, and said, 'You take good care of this while I'm gone, mija, and she'll take care of you,'" Julie explains. "It sort of just became our thing after that, something she did every time she left for the hospital until, well..." She doesn't finish her sentence, but the heavy weight of what goes left unsaid makes his heart ache for the girl in front of him. Julie's told Luke so much about Rose Molina in the time they've known each other, though she mostly sticks to safer memories, regaling him with recollections of writing music together, or stories passed down to her about her mother's days touring up the coast in a cramped van with Rose and the pedal pushers. She tends to gloss over details about her mom getting sick, rushing through memories of family dinners, eating bland hospital food, of nights spent helping Carlos with his homework under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the waiting rooms, or the long weekends spent over at her tia Victoria's, the both of them staying up late to watch telenovela reruns, dreading the moment the phone might ring, the sharp trill bringing with it the arrival of bad news. But standing here with Julie, watching the gentle, steady way she holds the necklace her mother left behind, a stark contrast to how her words had quivered as she'd pushed them out. All of it puts that chapter of her life into perspective for Luke in a way that Julie has never been able to before. He wants to tell her that he can't fathom the strength it must have taken to soldier on through the worst of it. But the words get lodged inside him and refuse to come out. With his eyes still trained on the necklace she holds between her fingertips, all Luke can think of is how many times Rose Molina must have turned to her daughter, taken her necklace off, and put it over her head before promising that it wouldn't be long before Julie could return it. He can't imagine what it must have been like for Julie the first time she realized she couldn't give the necklace back. He can't imagine what it must have been like when Julie realized that she would never be able to give her mother's necklace back again. Luke's so lost in the thought, it takes him a beat before his brain catches up and fully processes what Julie's doing, brows inching up toward his fringe in a mix of panic and shock as he watches her slip the gold chain over her head.
Julie, I can't,"
he stammers as her hands move toward him. "Yes, you can," she insists firmly. "Please, Luke." She doesn't wait for him to say anything else, and all further protests melt away as she stretches up onto her toes and loops her mother's necklace around his neck. Keeping one hand on his shoulder, she lets the other smooth over his front, fingertips skimming down his chest before her palm comes to rest where the pendant now sits above his heart. "It's just on loan anyway," Julie says quietly, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes.
"Something to take care of me while I'm gone?"
he echoes back.
"Yes, and also so you've got a good reason to come back home."
Her eyes tear away from his the moment she realizes there's no dismissing the implication forged between every word. Clearing her throat a little too loudly, she stammers a bit when she hastily adds,
"Because, you'll have to give it back, right? The necklace, I mean."
On any other day, Luke would have stuck to the unspoken rules they've set for their interesting little relationship. Let the moment pass like she's clearly hoping he will, like the both of them have done so many times now he's lost count. But Julie's hand is still pressing against his chest, the heat of her skin seeping through the thin cotton of his cutoff and burning into his own below.
"I love you."
The words echo and ricochet around in his head and in his chest, just like they've done 1,000 other times since they met. It's not a revelation. Luke's been in love with Julie for a while now. But whenever he thinks about telling her, the words, "I love you," always seem a little lackluster, like they're not magnificent enough to express everything he feels for her. Music's always filled in the blanks when words have escaped him, but he's yet to come up with a chord progression, that feels like it's worthy enough either. So he's just never said it. In a moment of desperation, he finds himself wishing for his heartbeat to return to him under the careful warmth of Julie's palm. Longs for it to sing out for her in a melody only she and she alone could ever coax from him. Luke doesn't need to feel his heart beat to know that if it could, it would beat for her. But he wonders if feeling it flutter beneath her fingertips would finally make Julie see that, dead or alive, his heart is hers to do with whatever she sees fit. There is always a bitter sting that tends to accompany the idea that no amount of wishing is likely to bring him or his heart back to life. But he sets that aside for the time being, trades it out for the thrill that comes with knowing he can touch her now, as he reaches up to cover Julie's hand with his own before she can think to remove it from his chest. He gives it a gentle squeeze and silently wills her to look back up at him. When she finally does, Luke holds her soft brown eyes with his own for a beat before he speaks, pouring everything he feels for her into the words, so there's no room for confusion. I've already got the only reason to come back home I'm ever gonna need. Julie's mouth parts in awe, a breathless "oh" tumbling out of her that Luke tries his best not to overanalyze. I should, he whispers, stepping back as he motions toward the window. Yeah, of course, she replies, clasping her hands in front of her. It's getting late, and he's already been longer than he'd told Reggie and Alex he'd be. Even so, he gives in to the selfish temptation to let his eyes do what they want, lets them sweep over her face one last time, as though he's committing her to memory. Luke, Julie blurts out just as he's about to poof back down to the studio. Before you go. He watches her curiously, waiting for her to continue. But whatever Julie had been about to say gets interrupted by a soft knock on her bedroom door. I hate to interrupt, Reggie says, poking his head straight through the door, his astute gaze bouncing between the two of them. But we'd better get going. We don't have much time. Can you give us another sec? Luke implores. Tell Alex I'll be right down. Reggie flashes Luke a thumbs up before he disappears. You were saying? He presses when Julie turns back toward him. It's nothing. She shakes her head, sending her curls whipping around her face. You sure, boss? Yeah, it can wait. Okay. Tell me when I get back. Julie nods curtly before adding, Be safe, the three of you, and don't do anything stupid. No promises, he chuckles. Luke! Nothing stupid. Cross my heart, he promises, his pointer finger bumping across her necklace as he draws an X across his chest. Cross my heart? That isn't some weird sort of ghost loophole, is it? She asks through a skeptic stare. Luke cocks his head to the side, contemplating her for a moment, his top teeth digging into his bottom lip. Cross yours, then, he says finally, his voice losing all of its earlier playfulness. Swearing on his own heart might not carry much weight, given that he's not exactly alive. But swearing on hers is another matter entirely. If push ever came to shove, Luke knows without a shadow of a doubt that he'd choose death all over again if it meant keeping promises to Julie's heart.
Okay.
She sighs.
I'll see you in a couple hours.
Again, Julie nods, and Luke flashes her a parting smile before poofing out of her room. To be continued in Chapter 2.
Thank you for reading.
Please drop by the archive
And let the author know what you thought of their work.